Tobias, first to you. Prime Minister promises a lot, seems not to deliver.
What an easy throwaway line. I think what we've seen today is just a recognition of how we've entered a very, very difficult decade. Our adversaries are pursuing very competing agendas, and they are starting to align, Russia, Iran and China. Britain has a reputation of stepping forward and recognizing that we need to do more. The world's threat picture is changing, it's deteriorating. The world is more contested than any time since 1945. So this was a clarion call to the nation, to the defense industry, to say, we need to look at the issues, we need to upgrade, we need to advance our defense posture. And I listened carefully to the conversation you just had. I'm sure we can all of us, Hamish as well, will all have great ideas as to where the money should go. My first question will be, let's take stock of what's coming over the hill. What are the threats that we need to prepare for? Not the ones we've had in the past, but where the character of conflict is changing. There's discussions about air defense over London. There's other discussions about whether we should have tactical nuclear missiles, because they may be on the agenda. I think Hamish has been writing about the threat of chemical weapons, for example. So the first thing we need to do is ask ourselves, what do we need? How do we need to advance our defense architecture? If you, as you were implying, ask the Army, they probably want more tanks, more personnel. The Navy want more surface fleet, and the RAF will probably want to increase their fast jets. Well, you've got the cyber security, you've got space, you've got the entire grey zone as well. Also, how are we working with our allies too? And most importantly, and this is why the Prime Minister's invested in Ukraine, Europe is at war again. Ukraine is doing the fighting for us. The state-on-state aggression is back, and we need to make sure that Ukraine wins, because if Russia is able to claim any form of success, then there's going to be real impact on the British economy, indeed the European economy, and the wider security as well. There's lots of questions to be asked before we start spending money.
Sorry to cut over you there, Tobias. I will come back to you in a moment. But let me bring Hamish into the conversation, if I may. So, look, Tobias has set it out well that in any military strategy, the first thing you have to do is to identify all the threats. Then, presumably, you have to set out what is the most significant to you, to your nation, and what we should prioritise. With that in mind, what needs investing in first, in your view?
Well, I think Tobias is right. But I don't think we've got the luxury at the moment of looking at all those threats. The one threat that we must be most concerned about is the Russian threat, and that is immediate. And we need to sort that now. Our conventional deterrence has been really paid lip service to since the end of the Cold War. And when Putin looks at us, he isn't deterred. When Putin looks at Europe, he isn't deterred. So I think this increase in spending, and I think it should be much more like 3%. Will at least make Putin think, and hopefully it's a message to our European allies to do exactly the same. But, if Ukraine doesn't prevail this summer, we might well have to get involved ourselves with boots on the ground. And quite frankly, everything else that's vexing us at the moment, all the other issues that people want to spend money on, if we're at war with Russia, they are going to be horrifically irrelevant. What we must do is to prepare in this pre-war phase, and we don't know how long it's going to be. It could be fairly short if the Russians break through. And as Tobias has said, the Russians are using a lot of chemical weapons at the moment that are having a similar impact as they did in the First World War. So we need to be realistic to that and make sure that we first, number one, provide the capability to the Ukrainians. And without the American $61 billion this week, I think we would be very close to war. So it's a combined thing. That the future that Tobias is talking about, absolutely, we need to get to that. But quite frankly, if we don't prevail in the near battle, the future is something that we won't have a luxury to consider.
Tobias, let me ask you, though, because every military expert or person involved in the military, inevitably they want more funding. Inevitably they will catastrophise, and inevitably they will warn us of the threats. Now, that's not to say that the threats aren't there. I think they are very real. We can see them for ourselves. But there is an assessment from a government's perspective, is there not, as to how much appetite there is from voters, not only to support your policies, but then also to support you with the taxpayers' funds you're going to need. So how far can you push it? And how much more money can you get allocated? It's never going to be enough for the military, but we have to do something. How do you get people on side?
Really good point. In fact, that's the most important point. You need to take the British nation with you. And that's part of the exercise the Prime Minister is trying to articulate here, to explain how globally exposed our economy is. We are extremely vulnerable. We're reliant on international supply chains, access to markets. We saw that during COVID. And it's very, very easy to interrupt the security of our supply, for example, on our energy needs as well. The Red Sea illustrated that as well, as did the grain ships coming out of Ukraine. This is what we need to articulate to the British people, that symbiotic relationship between our economy and indeed our security as well. I think Hamish was alluding to this. There won't be any money for education or health or the policing or whatever if the budgets are affected, if our overall prosperity is hit because of greater disturbances to our economy. And that's where we need to work together with NATO to recognize those wider threats and to stand up. And we've had 30 years where it's been relatively peaceful, and our capabilities, our defense posture has been reduced over that period. I mean, you touched on it yourself, the size of the armed forces as well. Now, this is the message from the British government, indeed, all of government and indeed all of Parliament, that those days are now over. We've got a bumpy decade ahead, and quite rightly, it's time to prepare.